Welcome to the guide, Exile. The build that we have in hand today is a duration and attack speed stacking Trickster that scales Toxic Rain's pod damage over time. These pods are not to be confused with Tide pods, of course, but are just as deadly if consumed. Unlike many other build versions of this skill, we do not concern ourselves with poison or hits, only the chaos damage over time from the pods. This means we do not need to care about poison chance or accuracy. Toxic Rain is a new skill that was introduced in patch 3.4. It fires a rain of 5 toxic arrows into the air, and they return to the ground in a random pattern within this set area. These arrows can strike targets, but not very reliably. Once on the ground, they form toxic pods that deal chaos damage over time for 1 second, and apply a grasping vine that slows the target's movement speed by 10%. And this is able to stack up to 60% from multiple pods. After 1 second, these pods will explode, hitting in small areas of effect. Now the pod dots within the same attack will not stack, but the pod dots from separate attacks will stack. So this means that we will want to lie down as many pods as possible and keep them in their dot form as long as possible. We can do this by getting very high attack speed and skill effect duration. Much like the Quill Rain Assassin, we are using the Quill Rain here to get as much attack speed as possible since the pod dot is not scaled by bow base damage, but instead by gem level. You could argue, well, wouldn't a plus X level bow be better? And while it could give you a better dot, your attack speed would almost be halved on most of these bows. This means that you would need the plus X bow to provide over twice the dot damage to reach the same total combined pod dot damage, and this is not really achievable by current means. So with the basic mechanics of the build out of the way, let's explore some more specifics. This toxic pod slinging Trickster makes for quite a nice build starter and endgame farming build on a real budget. Since most of our damage comes from gem levels and links rather than serious investments into gear, we can get going on welfare gear quite easily. The only unique that I absolutely recommend that you get is the Quill Rain, but of course the build can be started without it. Offensively, we are using Toxic Rain for all encounters. It is able to one-shot map monsters and stack up quite quickly to drain map bosses. For support on bosses, we are using a Toxic Rain attached to a ranged attack totem to not only lay down more pod dots, but to apply Wither stacks via Withering Touch support. Wither hinders the target, further lowering their movement speed and makes them take increased chaos damage. With both of these combined, targets are slowed up to 90% of their movement speed. This makes managing fast boss targets very easy to dodge, such as the Phoenix Guardian. Beyond these two attacks, we again stack a lot of attack speed via the Trickster Ascendancy with Frenzy charges, along with gear and jewels. Finally, we grab the increased skill effect duration within the tree to extend the pod dot duration. Defensively, we gather life and mana nodes, as we are going with Mind Over Matter from the Cloak of Defiance chest. This greatly enhances our mana pool and how we deal with mana sustain for rapid attacking of Toxic Rain, as the Trickster has a 20% chance to gain 10% of mana back on skill usage. This will let us spam the attack and never run out of mana. Now if you cannot get the Cloak of Defiance yet, you can always grab Mind Over Matter from the tree temporarily. Beyond this, we also get Acrobatics and Phase Acrobatics for attack and spell dodge, Blind from Abyss Jewels to improve evasion chance, and Life Regeneration to keep us going. As the Trickster, we also gain a percentage of our life and mana on kill, so we have an effective method for leeching whilst mapping. For bosses, we simply have to play a bit smarter, but a life gain on hit Elder Ring, while not necessary, can help out on life sustain. The playstyle for this build is very simple. We put on Blood Rage and then skirt around maps, dropping Toxic Rain at each pack. At bosses, you will simply want to ensure that you put down your ranged attack totem and maintain frenzy charges, whilst raining down some toxic pods. The path of building and pacement can be found within the written guide and description. We are of course picking the Shadows Trickster. This class provides a wealth of damage and utility for the build. Patient Reaper provides us a pseudo leech and maps, granting percentage of life and mana recovered on kill, as well as increased dot damage and life and mana recovery rate. Prolonged Pain gives us a solid skill effect duration, more damage over time, and reduced damage taken from damage over time sources. Weave the Arcane. This is our main mana sustain powerhouse, with a 20% chance to recover 10% of mana when using a skill. The skill cost relative to our mana pool is such that this will always sustain us. It also provides us some nice generic damage reduction and free mana cost on movement skills. Swift Killer. Finally, this gives us a method for generating frenzy charges in maps, an extra frenzy charge, as well as a bunch of extra generic damage. I would follow this order in the Ascendancy. Here is the final passive tree of the build, assuming use of Cloak of Defiance. We gather life, mana, frenzy charges, skill effect duration, and jewel sockets. If you are not using Cloak of Defiance yet, you can either go with a pure life version or grab Mind Over Matter from the tree as shown in this variant. Leveling trees are included in the description and written guide. As for Pantheons, any of the majors will work depending on your situation, and the same goes for minors. Concentrated Effect only reduces the AoE of the pod dot and after explosions by a relatively small amount, and not the actual area where the arrows fall in. As such, it can be used during all mapping and bossing scenarios without much detriment. Ensure to have the first 4 links in this setup always. They are its main purpose and utility. The last 2 links are just for more damage on the totem. Here, Clarity is only required if you choose to use a Watcher's Eye with Clarity modifiers. I will discuss these later. As for Phase Run, even though it drops our Frenzy charges, it is insanely useful now with the instant casts, and especially for delves when you need to pass through enemies quickly. I only use it in times of need, for speed. I chose to use a pair of Bubonic Trails in the build, and this 3-gem link is in it. If you choose to not use Bubonic Trails, you can always socket a quality Culling Strike in this 4-link. Just like with the Jug of all trades, you could most certainly start this build on all rare items, and work your way to the uniques listed here. For the helmet, there is almost none better than a Devota's Devotion. We get attack speed, movement speed, chaos resistance, and some evasion. The reduced physical damage does not matter to us, so this makes for a great choice. Of course, you could also fossil craft a -9 chaos resistance to nearby enemies for a rare helmet in the Delve League. For enchantments, none of the Toxic Rain ones are really worth it, aside from maybe the extra arrow to improve coverage. Instead, the 12% Blood Rage attack speed would be your best bet. For the body, I chose to use Cloak of Defiance for the massive mana pool bump and more effective Mind Over Matter, saving us points on the tree, helping our effective life pool and better sustain of our mana. Of course, as shown in the passive tree section, you could use a rare chest here or really any unique chest you want, taking Mind Over Matter from the tree, or completely forgoing it to grab more life instead. The only issue without Mom could be your mana sustain with the fast attacking skill. For gloves, a nice pair of rare gloves with life, attack speed, and resistance will do you well. Gripped Gloves Implicit will not scale the pod dot as it's listed as attack damage, but I had crafted a decent pair with an essence, so I decided to use these anyways. I chose to use Bubonic Trail Boots to provide some extra damage and utility via Abyss Jewels, along with Death Walk to help remove corpses from underneath my feet. The single socket variant is plenty and very cheap. If you choose to use rare boots over these, look for high movement speed, life, and resistances. For enchantments, I would look for the percentage increased attack and cast speed if you killed recently, or the percentage life and mana regen if you have been hit recently. A Stygian is a great choice since we only really need life, resistances, and maybe Flask effect on the belt. We can then socket an Abyss Jewel in here for extra utility and damage. With Delve, you can also look to fossil craft chaos damage on a belt if you so choose. The amulet can be as simple as life, mana, and resistances on a rare base. You can also look around for a useful Shaper or Elder mod, and even Essence or Delve Fossil mods for chaos damage. As you will see on all my jewelry, I do not have any extra chaos damage, so there is a lot of room to add more damage to the build. Rings like the amulet can also be as simple as life, mana, and resistances, and just the same as amulets, you can look for useful Shaper, Elder, Essence, or Delve Fossil modifiers. You will be able to get chaos damage with Essences and Delve modifiers, whilst with Elder mods you could look for a life gain on hit ring to further help your life sustain. However, the life gain on hit is not all that powerful or required to make the build function. As you can see here, I have one ring with it, but you really don't start to get the life gain on hit until the pods start popping. The weapon is of course the Quill Rain. This bow is our best in slot since we do not care for accuracy or base hit damage. We just want to lay down as many Toxic Rain pods as possible, and this bow provides that utility. It makes using bows a lot more fun via all the attack speed as well. Again, you can certainly start on a high attack speed rare and literally ignore the implicits. For the quiver, there are really no good unique options. You could use a drill neck for the attack speed and life, but in the end I chose to go for a Shaper quiver to get that extra arrow into the mix. I got this quiver very cheap, basically by accident when looking for a Shaper base to craft on, and just ended up keeping it. Extra arrows for this build will not really increase the damage twofold like in a barrage build, but instead will make the clear and coverage a bit more consistent in the area that the arrows fall. I would instead look for a Shaper quiver with life, attack speed, movement speed, and maybe even utilities such as Onslaught and Blind. Flasks for this build are very basic. A Witchfire Brew is a best in slot flask for its defensive utility, as well as damage over time for the pods, and Despair Curse for more chaos damage. Sulfur Flask for a generic damage implicit, as well as some life regen. Quartz Flask for phasing to pass through enemies with 10% attack and spell dodge is very nice. A Quicksilver Flask to get us moving through maps and packs even faster, and finally a Life Flask to top us off in times of need. I'll show you some example jewels used in my build within the video and leave the affix priority in the written guide. The only unique jewel that I use in this build is a Watcher's Eye with chance to recover 10% of mana whilst affected by Clarity. This gives us yet another chance to recover mana while spamming Toxic Rain. It is not a required jewel, but a nice backup jewel in case you do dump a bunch of mana. You could also use a percentage of damage taken recovered as mana over 4 seconds while affected by Clarity Watcher's Eye, or you could choose to use no Watcher's Eye. For regular jewels, just looking for some generic damage, chaos damage, projectile damage, and attack speed will work. And for Abyss jewels, try and get one with Onslaught on kill and the other with Blind Chance on hit, and then mix those in with maybe some life and attack speed modifiers. For more information on leveling, check out the written guide. This build, just like the Quill Rain Poison Assassin before it, was an absolute joy to play. In the end, we get a very similar playstyle, weaving through enemies as they keel over, consuming our Tide Pods. They probably didn't read the warning labels. All with a much lower cost to get to similar damage and defensiveness. Best of all, the build works great in all content, especially when rolling no Leech, Reflect, or no regen maps. I would highly recommend giving Toxic Rain a try in some fashion, as it is currently a very strong and fun skill to play. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one, Exile.